Hey guys, we're going to do a full walkthrough of the RODECaster Pro, how to get it set up, all the ins and outs, different settings, my recommended recording methods, etc., etc. So let's jump right in, and the reason that you're seeing my screen instead of the RODECaster itself is because the first thing you want to do is download the Rode software and install the updated firmware to your device. So if you're getting it fresh out the box, there's going to be some changes to the software inside the RODECaster that you do need to update. So go to the Rode site, just type in RODECaster Pro, or go to rode.com and click on the RODECaster, and then click on Downloads here. And we're going to download the companion software, which last I checked, just go ahead and put my number in here. Last I checked was one download, which includes the RODECaster app and the Firmware Update app, which are separate things. So punch in your email, choose your operating system, go ahead and download, and then we'll open up RODECaster app installer. It'll do its thing. Let's open the folder, and yes, so here we have a package which will install the RODECaster software. So I'll run that first. Go ahead, go through all the regular prompts, etc., etc., and let it do its thing. Okay, done. And then also we have the Firmware Updater. The Firmware Updater is an application already. There is no install. So instead of double clicking and having to do the install prompts, actually just click and drag this to applications. And my system is going to tell me that I already have one in there because I already have it installed. So I'll stop for my purposes, but for you, just drag and drop to applications. Let's open applications and go ahead and update the Firmware Updater. Choose the RODECaster Pro on the right. That's obviously the system that we're using. Click the arrow prompts to start the update, and it will tell you to connect if it is not already connected. Mine is on, mine's plugged in, but it's not turned on. So let me fire my RODECaster up really quick. And the arrow will light up once it's connected and ready to go. And then it will tell you here on this last screen if it's up to date or if it needs updated. Mine looks like it's still up to date, which is good. For yours, the first time you do this, it will most likely be out of date. So go ahead and just follow the prompts here. Get that installed. It will do its thing. It will install the RODECaster. You'll see the dialog box change on the RODECaster display, and then it will restart, and then it will be good to go. And then once you're done here, you can close the Firmware Updater. And then let's open the RODECaster Pro app as well, just to see what that looks like. So the main thing that I use this for, you can listen to your podcasts if you put the RODECaster in transfer mode, so you can listen to what you've recorded through this app. I usually don't bother with that though. What I use this for is to update the sound bank. So we'll talk about the details of the sound bank and how to activate that on the RODECaster when we switch cameras. But this is where you will be able to add custom music to your sound bank. So if you want to have your podcast theme music on here, or if you want to have a batch of sound effects, things like that, how you'll actually put those custom sounds on the RODECaster is opening this app, going and clicking one of the sound bank options, and uploading an audio file, and it will transfer that over to the Rode. So software-wise, that's essentially all that we really have to mess with on the computer. You can go as crazy as you want with the sound banks. For my uses, I only have 2 tracks here. I have intro music and I have background music, and that's all that I really need. But feel free to add as many tracks or sound effects as you want. And you'll notice too, if you click on one of these, you're able to change the color, and you're able to change the playback style of the pad when you click it, which would be these 4 different options here. Latch is, you click it once to start playing, click it again to stop, pause, click it once to start playing, click it again to pause the track where it is, and if you hit it again, it will continue to play. Replay will just continue to loop. And then if you're wondering how to stop something that's looping on the RODECaster, click the pad once to start playing, and then click and hold for 3 seconds to stop the sound altogether and reset it. You can also rename what your sound banks are. So again, that's it for the software side. We're going to move over to the RODECaster now. All right, so here we are with the RODECaster. First things first, just an overview of the surface and an overview of the back of the RODECaster. Let's actually take a look at the back first. Power button powers the RODECaster on and off. Power cable, this screws on, so it actually latches. It's magnetic and it latches as well. That way you don't have to risk kind of accidentally yanking the power cord out of the RODECaster. So plug that in all the way and then screw the plug down so that it's latched. Then continuing on, we have the USB cable connection to your computer or to iPad or iPhone, which we'll talk about later. Micro SD card slot, speaker/monitor outputs, for headphone outputs, an 1/8 inch for attaching a phone or an auxiliary source of audio, and then 4 microphone inputs, XLR inputs here as well. And then on the top, headphone volume controls here, speaker volume control here, sound bank, record button, and then all your sliders for your various channels. And this will make more sense once we turn it on. So let's go ahead and hit that red power button in the back. Turn the RODECaster on, you'll see it fire up. It will do its thing. And then as long as you've updated your firmware, which we talked about already, the display here and any of the settings in the menu that we go through should match with what you see on your screen as well. If something doesn't look the same on your screen as it does on mine, double check that the firmware is installed and that you have the newest version updated. So just going through the channels again really quick, they correlate to what we saw on the back of the RODECaster. So 1 through 4, just these are your 4 microphone inputs in the back, your 4 XLR inputs. USB again, sound source coming from the computer. Phone symbol is the 1/8 inch auxiliary port on the back. So they have it labeled with a phone icon, but you can use this with any sound source that's going through an 1/8 inch aux cord. Bluetooth connection, Bluetooth sync to your phone or your iPad or your computer in order to take phone calls. And then the sound bank here at the end, which I only have 2 sound sources lit up. If your RODECaster is stock, you should see all of these loaded up, and you can play and pause, etc. The icons at the bottom are typical solo or mute buttons. So mute would mute a specific track. So if you have all of your mics up, let's say you have your sound up as well, or actually let's say you have a call going, you can mute the call without having to worry about adjusting the volume. If you have the volume set exactly where you want it to be, you can just mute and unmute this way easily. So that's muting a specific track. Solo is the inverse of that. So I would solo just channel 4. Everything else would be muted as far as what you're hearing. So you can maybe check mic levels or monitor something with one channel specifically. So solo and mute buttons there. Important things for your mics. Actually, let me step back. Let's go through some of the default settings that I recommend that you set up here, and then we'll plug in a mic and we'll do some testing here. So on the screen, top left is the gear for the settings. Let's open that first. And then click on hardware. Then click on micro SD card. And we're gonna put in an SD card here to do some tests. So the RODECaster will take a micro SD. What I actually recommend you get is this SanDisk has a combo. So it has an adapter and it has a micro SD inside. So this is usually more common for getting the files onto your computer, and the micro SD just fits right in the adapter like that. So the micro SD will go in the back of the RODECaster, and when you put that in, you should hear a click. That means it's in altogether. Now you notice that the record button changed from blue to green here. I hope you can see that on the screen. Let me turn this off actually. This Bluetooth button's kind of bright. So the record button turned to green. If it's blue, as you saw when the micro SD card was removed, you can't record anything. You can't actually record any tracks. Once the SD card is in, it will turn green, letting you know that you're ready to record. And then if you do hit record, it will turn red and you'll see the counter going up. That means you're recording, you're good to go. Okay, back to the menu. So menu, hardware, micro SD card. First thing you want to do is put the SD card in and erase it to format your card. Now what I recommend, just to keep everything organized, is do a session on the RODECaster, take the SD card out, get the files off and onto your computer, and then when you put it back in, erase the SD card. That way you start every session from scratch. And you don't have to worry about finding different files, you don't know how they're named, etc. It just seems to be easier. So I do recommend erasing that every time you get ready to do a session. Podcast transfer mode here is an option to transfer files from the RODECaster to your computer. So if I hit this and say yes, it will lock the RODECaster from recording, and then it basically is treating this like an SD card. So if you're plugged in USB to your computer should show the RODECaster pop up like an external disk, and you can grab the files right off of here without having to take the SD card out. Now I've tried this and it seems to be, I would say, 5 to 10 times slower than using the SD card, and because of that I would just recommend taking the extra step or two to take the SD card out physically and use it in your computer to transfer. But say you have one of those newer Macs, you don't have the SD card slot, you don't want to buy a dongle for it, that's totally fine. Just use podcast transfer mode here. All right, going back one in the menu. A couple of these are just preferential. For example, brightness. This is totally up to how bright you want the buttons and the display to be, so I'll leave that totally up to you. Headphones, boost or limit maximum headphone volume. I have boost in mine. I like them a little louder, but for most situations you can probably leave that turned off and adjust the headphones manually here. We'll get to that later. I'm gonna turn mine back on. Bluetooth. This is just turning it on or off and then pairing with the device. It will show up on your iPhone or iPad or whatever. It will say RODECaster Pro, just like you would pair any Bluetooth device. Pretty self-explanatory there. And then click on Advanced, and here's where we have a few settings that we definitely need to check every time. The most important thing here is multitrack, and this is, in my opinion, the best feature of the RODECaster Pro is the way it records multitrack for you. So click on multitrack, and you can select if recording with the SD card is multitrack, if recording via USB into a DAW like Logic or Pro Tools is multitrack, and then you can select bypass audio processing. So what I would recommend to you is just to have all three of these turned on. We almost always want to have multitrack enabled. Bypass audio processing, what this means is any effects, any processing that's happening on the RODECaster while you're recording will not actually be written in the raw multitrack recording on the SD card. So for example, let's say you have your music here blaring the entire recording. Maybe you like recording with background music. You'll hear that as you're going through the session, and it'll be in the stereo mix of the session, but it will not be in the raw multitrack recording. So that will not show up in your mic's feeds in the multitrack recording because we're bypassing everything. So I recommend having this turned on, and micro SD card and USB also turned on as well. And I'll explain a little bit more when we get to the channel effects on why bypassing is so important. Audio, mix minus, I'll leave that completely up to, actually sorry, mix minus, no. Mix minus you definitely do want. That way when anyone is calling in, if you're taking a phone call for a recording, they will be able to hear everything that's coming through the board except for their channel. So that means if you have all 4 people on a call and you have the music turned up, your guest over the phone will hear the music and all the participants, and they won't get any feedback from themselves. That's what mix minus is. What I meant to say was pre-fade, listen, that is completely up to you. It gives you the option to bypass processing, so you can hear live what the raw track sounds like. Monitor outputs automatically mute outputs. This I would recommend if you don't have anything plugged in, if you don't have speakers or monitors plugged into the back. You can just leave that on, leave this dial down, and then don't even mess with it. You don't have to worry about that if you don't have any speakers plugged in. Information is date and time. The first time you start your RODECaster up, you will set the date and time, but you can change that if you need to, or if you switch time zones. Reset is resetting all the settings. We obviously don't want to do that now. And that's the main settings here in the settings panel that you want to be aware of. So if I go back to the home screen and then click settings again to go to the main settings menu, the other things that we haven't talked about, sounds is again referring to the sound bank here. I won't talk too much about that. Podcasts is a way for you to listen back to anything that's recorded that's living on the SD card already. You can listen back to from the RODECaster if you need to, kind of review one of the episodes. And then channels, I haven't talked about that because what we actually like to do is access channel settings one at a time by pushing the input button here. So for every mic channel that you have, if you push this, whichever corresponds to that channel, it will open up specific channel settings: level, microphone, voice, and advanced, which we are about to dive into right now. So we'll do channel 1 here, and I'll actually grab a microphone that I have sitting over here. This is just an SM58, what I use for mine. This is also what I use for almost all of our live recordings. It's a solid mic, very durable. It's only $99, so it's affordable, especially when you have 4 of them. You have a whole group that you're recording with. So the other end of the XLR cable will go into the back of the RODECaster. Doesn't necessarily, hey, focus please. Doesn't matter which of these that you use. If it's just me recording, I usually just default to input 1. And then let's actually click the first button to go back to the home screen, and you should see, if I'm tapping on the microphone here, let me get that in the camera view for you. There we go. So if I tap on this, you will see some levels coming through the RODECaster. It is getting signal. If I mute this, you shouldn't see anything coming through because we've muted the channel. So even though if I was recording, it would still be recording, I'm not monitoring anything, I'm not hearing anything here out of the levels. All right, so first things first is setting the level for your microphone. So let's hit 1 again to open channel settings. Let's hit the level button. This is a mic check, a level check, a gain check, whatever you want to call it. This is one of the most important things, and something that is a distinction. You can set the gain and you can set the level here differently than how you're setting the monitoring volume by moving the fader up and down. There's 2 types of gain. 2 types of volume that you're dealing with. So the first is gain. That's how much signal we're getting from the microphone into the board. And then the volume slider is how much of that channel are we hearing in the mix. So what I recommend, and you notice that if I turn this fader all the way down, I'm still getting signal here on the level. So what I recommend is that you check levels first by opening up the level setting for your channel, and then we'll adjust these up and down. The level goes from, I believe, 0 to 50 based on how loud or how quiet you need it to be. Some mics pick up a lot, you need to turn it down. The 58s here, they aren't super sensitive, so I usually have these between 35 and 40 depending on who I'm recording with. And let me just tap on this again, and you'll see these 2 smaller bars here, these green bars. That's basically the sweet spot. Rode is kind of designated that when you're talking at a normal volume, you want your levels to be sitting right there. Let me actually, instead of tapping this, I'm just gonna go ahead and talk. Check, 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 talking into the microphone. So I'm actually a little above that sweet spot, so I wanna come back a little bit. Let's say about 37, I think 37 looks good. So that seems like it's right on track for my voice. I might even go down 1 more. And this you always wanna check before recording. Especially if you have different guests on every episode. They will have varying levels of their voice loudness and voice tone. So always check the levels. Don't trust it. Don't set it and forget it. Always check your mic settings. Now, if you have multiple channels plugged in, let's say we have 4 mics, I have my level settings open, and now I can just cycle between the different inputs, channel 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I can check the levels accordingly for each one without having to go back through the menu. Boom. Let's go back one in the menu here. So levels, I would say, is the most important thing. We also have microphone and voice settings. Now, as far as I'm aware, changing the microphone setting here, the RODECaster will attempt to give you a preset. So if you have the Rode Broadcaster mic, and if you click that, it will attempt to apply settings and adjust the gain based on that microphone. What I would say is go ahead and set this to dynamic if it's a dynamic mic, condenser if it's a condenser mic, leave it there, and then check the gain manually. I think that's just a better way to go about it. So the SM58 is a dynamic mic, so we'll keep it there. If you're using, for example, one of the Heil microphones, I think a lot of those are condensers. Rode has condensers, AKG. It kind of depends on whatever microphone that you do have. So yeah, I would set that to your microphone style and then just leave it. And then under voice, there are settings here for tone and for strength. Again, trying to compensate for the variance in different voice styles. Again, what I do is just set these both to medium for tone and for strength. Set them both to medium and then handle any that variance in post-production, in mixing. Don't really worry about that for recording. So let's go back a few pages. And then advanced. So going back to what we were talking about with audio processing and why we want to bypass that. So this is all stuff that you can have active on your track while you're recording with the RODECaster. So compressor, de-esser, high-pass filter, noise gate, oral exciter, processing, and bottom. So in a general sense, I usually keep all of these on except for big bottom. That kind of gives you a little boost in the bass range. The 58 is already a little bit boomy, so I leave that off just for my own reference while I'm recording. Oral exciter is giving you a little bit of boost in the presence range, in the higher frequency range. So that would be another one based on your mic or based on your voice you may want to turn off if it sounds a little tinny, or if you're getting too many S's, higher frequency range things happening in the recording, I would turn that off. But I'd like a little presence with these 58, so I keep it on. So this is all happening live. The RODECaster is processing your microphone, your audio signal, with all of these effects live as you're listening back to it. The reason that we do the bypass audio processing for the multi-track recording is that we don't want any of this to negatively impact the recording. And we'll go back to the computer in a second and I'll show you what the RODECaster files look like. But none of this should have an effect on the raw recording that we're going to make. This is just an aid for if you're recording something live, or if you're recording something, maybe you're doing a live stream or like an actual live podcast, like in person. You want to have some of these controls that you can keep a balance on the sound, like the master output that's coming out of the RODECaster. But what happens is maybe you drive the levels too hard. Maybe you have big bottom on and the bass is way too boomy and you don't want that to be on the final recording. That's where in post-production you can take the raw tracks from the multi-track and it will bypass all of this, and then you can just take it and mix it from scratch with the raw files. So again, I'm kind of like stressing that it is one of the best features about the RODECaster, but also it's important that you're aware of that when you're setting those things up. And again, for the microphone voice settings and for this advanced processing, you can filter through and change those settings based on each individual channel. And that, as far as settings goes, is essentially everything that we need to cover with the RODECaster. One last thing here, there's a little icon in the top right with the SD card. icon. So this is going to show you how much room is left on your card, how many more hours of recording time you have before you run out of space. So definitely keep an eye on that. And then the last thing, I guess, that I did skip over is just the headphone volume here. This is correlating to headphones 1 through 4, the inputs here on the back, and this is just independent volume adjustments for each person's headphone. So some people like it loud, some people don't. You can adjust that specifically for everybody that you're recording with. So that is the main overview of the RODECaster. Let's jump back to the computer. Let's look at what the recorded files look like, and we'll get a final kind of picture on why that multi-track aspect is so important. One more quick thing before we move back to the computer is just an easy way to create a backup recording. So I do a lot of stuff on site, and I just have a stereo backup from the RODECaster. I can't imagine I'll lose power because this power cable is always in there, so I don't have any worries there, but SD cards happen to get corrupted every once in a while. There could be some sort of issue, so making a backup is always safe. It also gives you a very nice small file size stereo recording of your podcast, which is easier to share and to preview without having to worry about the RODECaster's WAV files, which we'll talk about in just a second. So let me snake this USB cable out of here. So this is the USB cable that comes from Rode. No, I do not want to shut down. We already kind of went over the USB jack here in the back. So the USB-C end of that cable goes here. And then the other thing we need, and I'll have the link for this in the show notes, is this adapter. I'm using an iPhone, iPad, but there should be a similar USB adapter for Android, tablets or phones. It's just a USB to Lightning adapter. This one's from Apple, so I'll have a link to this. USB cable goes into the adapter, and then we'll take the adapter into iPhone. Go ahead and power this thing up, and then we'll open up voice memos on iPhone or iPad. Let's see if you can get this to focus. This is what this looks like. And then go ahead and hit record. And if this is working properly, right now there should be no signal coming from voice memos at all. But let's say I start some music on the RODECaster and I crank the volume up, you should see waveforms coming into voice memos. So with this method, you're basically getting a stereo signal from the RODECaster from the USB cable through the adapter into your phone. So what I'll do is if I'm recording at a conference or an event, I'll have my iPad or I'll have my phone here plugged into the USB line from the RODECaster, recording multi-track from the SD card, but also running a backup here through voice memos. It's always good to have a backup recording, and like I said, it's a nice stereo file that you can send to preview or to listen to the podcast before you go into editing. So I'll have both of these recording at the same time, and then once you stop here, you can send this, airdrop it to yourself, whatever you need to do, upload it to Dropbox, what have you. The only thing to be aware of is sometimes when you unplug and plug in the adapter here, it has a tendency to sometimes reset the phone to be picking up from the microphone instead of from the cable. So I always recommend closing voice memos, plugging in the adapter first, wait a second or two, open voice memos, hit record. And again, you're not seeing any signal at all because nothing's coming through the RODECaster right now. It's just silent. If, for example, I was recording this, say this was plugged in, but you were seeing this kind of signal come through, the mic is still activated. So what you would want to do is unplug the adapter, plug it back in, and it should kind of reset. Boom. So every time you plug this in, it will recognize there's a new audio device and it will reset. I'll start recording and I can see that the adapter is working. Again, we'll test it with some music. Boom, I'm getting signal. That means things are working properly. All right, and then the last step is just getting those files off of the RODECaster. So I've taken out the SD card, put it in the adapter, it's in my Mac, and the RODECaster is appearing here in Finder as it's a device. Now I've used this card for a couple things, so I have some extra folders here on the SD card. If you've only used this to record on the RODECaster, what you will see is just one folder called Rode, None of this other stuff will be there. If we open this, you'll see another one called Podcasts. And opening that, you will see all of your recordings. Now it just labels them from starting with 1 and then goes down sequentially as many recordings as you can fit on the card, which is why I mentioned earlier, it's always good practice to get one session's WAV files off of the card and then clear it from scratch before you record again, just to help organizing. The other thing is that there's a file limit, file size limit, kind of like what you would see on a video camera. So anytime the Rode recordings get to about 30 minutes, it will split off into another file. And you can see here a couple of these that have reached the file size limit, 3.78 gigs. It will start to break your recording into multiple files. So if you see that, if you record one session and see like 4 files, totally normal, don't be alarmed. And just to see an example of that, let's go back here. So here's is one session that I did yesterday. It split it into 3 tracks. You can see that the first 2 are capped at the limit, 3.78 gigs. The last one is a little bit less. Let's see the length on this. Yeah, about 31 minutes is the maximum. So if you see multiple tracks, don't be alarmed, totally fine. And then let's import one of these to Logic so we can see what the multi-track session actually looks like. So I use Logic for post-production. Audition, Pro Tools, any of those apps should function the same. Let's take a slightly smaller one here. I'll drag this one in. So dragging and dropping, your DAW will probably ask you how you want to import it. It will probably check sample rate. The RODECaster does record in 48K. I did not mention that earlier, but it does record in 48, not 44.1. So you might want to change your audio templates to be 48K just to make things easier. Converting 4 files that are 4 gigs long, 4 gigs in size can take a while. So we can see one single .wav file actually gives us 14 tracks here, and we're going to go through what these are. So the first 2 are left and right, your stereo output from the RODECaster. So anything that you heard while recording, any changes in volume, muting or unmuting of people, your sound effects, your music, all that is going to be on this main feed here, this stereo mix from the session. And let's go ahead and rename these, that way they're easier to look at. You might consider making a template renaming these as well. So there's our stereo tracks at the top. And then we have, in order, our 4 mic inputs. Mics 1 through 4 are here, individual tracks. Again, let's rename these, mic 2, mic 3, mic 4. And then these are all, by the way, going left to right on the RODECaster, just what those channels are. So after the 4 mics, we have a stereo signal from the USB channel, a stereo signal from the phone/aux input channel, stereo signal from the Bluetooth, and then stereo signal from the sound bank. And yes, there are 2 tracks each because they are left and right mono. Putting those together gives you 1 stereo track. So let's rename the rest of these as well. USB left, USB right, aux left, aux right, Bluetooth left, Bluetooth right, sound bank left, sound bank right. Boom. If you were to run the RODECaster multi-track into your computer to record, instead of on the SD card but directly into Logic or Audition or Pro Tools, these would come through, the tracks would come through with a total of 14 in the same way. So I would again recommend naming those tracks appropriately just to keep track of everything, no pun intended. And now if I come in here and I'm about to do a mix, let's say if I didn't record a backup, usually what I'll do is solo the stereo feed. I'll set my locators and I'll probably just bounce an MP3. That way I don't have to worry about sending these 4 gigabyte WAV files to clients or to partners to listen to. If I'm not exporting just a stereo mix, I'll actually just delete those first 2 tracks altogether, and then I have these 4 mics and the other tracks to mess around with, And most of the time, to be honest with you, I'm just using the microphone inputs, so I'll probably come in here and delete those other tracks as well and be left with just these 4. But again, it's always good to have that raw recording, that multi-track recording. Even though it looks overwhelming with 14 tracks, I think it's better to have it and not need it than the other way around. The other option here, by the way, is if you're running the RODECaster USB, if it's plugged into your computer USB, there's 2 things that you can do. One is getting audio from your computer through the USB channel into the RODECaster, where in that scenario you would use the you would use the USB channel 5, to adjust the sound coming from your computer as a sound source. The other way is to actually treat the USB cable going to your computer as an input, and then you could be running the RODECaster as an audio device in Logic or Pro Tools or Audition, what have you, or for live streaming, for example. If you wanted to use OBS or something to stream your podcast and you have the RODECaster plugged in via USB, you'd just be getting a sound source from the RODECaster. So again, that stereo feed with your sounds, all the processing and everything is coming into your computer to be recorded or to be streamed, and then you could simultaneously also record on the SD card. So that's what we'll do for our show, for example. If I go ahead, I'll just open up OBS here for you to see, and it looks like it still has my my camera here. Let's go ahead and just get that out of the picture for right now. And I'll just leave it in there for now. So this is the OBS interface, and if I go ahead and let's plug in the RODECaster. And I'm just going to play some music here, try to get some signal coming in. My audio mixer here, I'm getting a mic/aux input of sound source from the RODECaster. So if I turn my music off, the sound will fade away, nothing's coming through, nothing's coming from my computer at all. If I put that music back up, I am getting sound. So one thing that we'll do for our recordings is run things through OBS, do everything live on the RODECaster. I have the processing, the compressor, the exciter, de-esser, everything from the RODECaster is coming into the live feed here, but I'm also recording multi-track onto the Rode. So if the live show goes well, everything's fine, and we can just export the podcast, master it to the right loudness, and we're good. Otherwise, I have all the multi-track files from the RODECaster, and if I need to change anything or go into doing edits or anything like that, I have that option. Again, super flexible with the way that you can record. And then again, we'll use Logic as an example. Let me go ahead and delete some of these. And let's go to the Logic audio menu and see what my audio devices are. So it looks like I have input and output options here. I can select the RODECaster. So again, stereo and multi-channel options. So I can select the RODECaster Pro stereo. Let's do input and output, yes. Apply. And then on my mic input and output settings, I should have the option for inputs just 1 and 2. So this would be left and right coming from the RODECaster. And if I make this a stereo track, it will default to inputs 1 and 2. So stereo feed coming from the RODECaster, that's it. Let's go ahead and change this to multi-channel. And it should look something like what we saw when I imported the WAV file. So now if I go in to select an input here, I should see 1 through 14. So stereo channels, 1 and 2 is the main output, 7 and 8 is the USB channel, 9 and 10 is the aux channel, 11 to 12 is the Bluetooth channel, 13, 14 is the sound bank channel, stereo feeds. And then if I were to change this to mono, it will break those up, and I could select mic 1, which is input 3, mic 2, mic 3, mic 4. I know it's a little confusing that they're not labeled exactly the same. It's just the order in which those inputs are viewable in your DAW is 1 through 14. So your mics are actually 3, 4, 5, and 6. Mics 1 through 4. And potentially what you could do is, connect your RODECaster Bluetooth here to a DAW instead of iPhone, iPad, connect it stereo, and then record a backup here in GarageBand or Logic or what have you, still recording the multi-track file on the SD card on the RODECaster. Again, functionality, it's crazy. So that is about everything for the RODECaster Pro. Please comment with any questions. There's probably one or two small things I forgot to mention, but definitely happy to answer any questions that you may have. I've been very, very pleased with the RODECaster in general. It's worked for almost every scenario that I've ever tried. Actually, it's worked for every single scenario I've ever tried it for. So I can live stream with the RODECaster with OBS, like I just showed. I take this to conferences. Anytime I need to record for clients in person, I'm bringing the RODECaster. I've never had more than 4 guests on one show at a time, so there's plenty of inputs, plenty of functionality. It's been great. It's been really great, and as you can tell just by the way it looks and the way it's built, it looks great. It looks professional as well. So it's a good thing to have, and I've really been able to get rid of almost all of our other podcast gear. I have the RODECaster, 4 mics, 4 headphones, and a webcam, and that's really all that we need to do anything. So yeah, again, please comment, ask any questions you might have, and happy to answer those. Thanks.